Hello, welcome to another video on Inkscape. In this video I'm going to be taking a look at the Trace Bitmap function of Inkscape. We're going to be taking a look at how we can use single scan from either simple designs or from photos like these, and we'll also be taking a look at multicolored scans so we can create vector traces like these. Stick with us. So if you want to use the Trace Bitmap function of Inkscape, the first thing we're going to need to do is open up the Trace Bitmap dialog box. So to do that, we're going to come up to the top here, we're going to click on Path, and down here we've got Trace Bitmap. We click on Trace Bitmap and that'll open up our dialog box. Now at the top of our dialog box we've got three different tabs that we can use. The first tab, Single Scan, creates a single path from the image. So when we use this one, we just create a single path. Multicolor, when we use multicolor, this creates multiple paths. We can color them, we can have them different shades of grey. Pixel art is for trying to make a decent picture from pixelated art, so the artwork that you used to get on the old-fashioned video games. I'm not going to look at pixel art in this video, I'm mainly going to concentrate on single scan and multicolor. So to get started, the first thing you're going to need to do is import your image that you want to trace. So to do that we can come up to File, down to Import, find the image that you want to import, we can double click on the image, OK to all the settings. I've imported it already and rescaled it. Let's just put that into the middle. So the first one I've got is this single colour. Well, saying that it looks single colour, but if we just move over to the side, it's actually made up of two colours. I drag it off to the side here and you can see that it's got a white background. Now this won't affect our scan, we'll just be scanning the black. So if we move it back, I'm going to press 6 on the keyboard just to centralise our page again. And with our image selected, we can then come back over to our Trace Bitmap dialog box and start adjusting the settings to how we want it. So the first thing we want to do is select single scan. So in here we've got a few different settings that we can adjust. The first one is detection mode. So if we just click on the drop down menu, we've got brightness cutoff, we've got edge detection, color quantization, auto trace and centerline auto trace. For the time being we're going to stick with brightness cutoff. Under that we've got threshold. This allows us to dictate what percentage of the brightness is included within our image. The image that they're using to start with is just a black and white logo, so adjusting this isn't going to make a great deal of difference. We'll look at that in greater detail when we look at photos and multicolored images. Below threshold we've got invert image. If we select our image, we can click on invert image and it will flip which part of the design creates our path. So it's always the dark area in our preview window that becomes the path. So if we have it not inverted, the black area within our preview window will be the path. But if we click on the invert, it will use the background to create the path. We'll click that back. Under that we've got details. So the first one is speckles. This allows us to adjust what Inkscape will ignore. So if you've got speckles up to 2 pixels, it will ignore them. Below that we've got smooth corners. This basically does what it says on the tin. It will just slightly smooth out those sharp corners. Below that we've got optimize. Optimize is similar to simplify. It tries to reduce the number of nodes within the image. So it'll join sections together and just remove nodes. Depending on the settings, dictates how much it's going to simplify our path. Underneath that we've got user assisted trace. This just allows you to try and help Inkscape decide what needs to be traced. We'll cover that in a little bit more detail later on. Underneath that we've got the preview window. The preview window just shows our image with the different settings applied, and then it will use this image to trace to create our vector graphic. So this is a good representation of what we're going to have when we've finished our trace. So if we're happy with all our settings, we can go ahead and we can click Apply. So it's now created our vector copy of our image and it's sat it on top of the original image. So if we just drag it off to one side, we can see our two images. Although they look identical at the moment because we're on a white background, there are differences. So if we come up and grab the rectangle tool, I'm just going to drag out a rectangle. We just sit it there. We grab our selection tool. We drop it down to the bottom so it sits behind our design, and we can see that our original design had this white background. If we now move our rectangle behind our bitmap trace, you can see that our tracing is a single path, so it doesn't have the two colours, the white and the black. It purely has the black logo design. So if we move down to our next image, I'll just get rid of that rectangle so it's out of the way. We select our raccoon down the bottom here, and because this has got different colours within the image, depending on how we set the threshold, we can pick up different amounts of the brightness. So at the moment, with it set to 0.45, we're picking up the darker colours, but it's ignoring this light grey behind. However, if we adjust it, we can increase it slightly, and when we get to a certain point, it'll include the light grey as well as the dark. So now we're still getting a single path, but it includes the two darker colours, leaving the white background. And we can see the two different copies that we can make. So if we move down, we can take a look at a photo. So I've used this in a previous video, and we used Trace Bitmap to create a single path from this image. So we're just going to use it again. So if we click on it, this time when we use brightness threshold, it makes more of a difference. What we can do, because this is a very small preview window, if we drag this over, it'll allow our image to grow to fit the window, so we've got a better view of our image. So now when we use threshold, it's going to make quite a lot of difference because we've got such varying brightnesses within our image. Depending on where we set it, we can adjust how much of the image is included. So I quite like that. We can either set it so the background is the path, or we can use the invert if we wanted to change it and have it the other way around. For this example, I'm going to keep it so that the background is the path, and then I'm going to press apply. You can drag it off to the side again. I don't want these blobs on the side here, so all I'm going to do for that, to get rid of those, is we just zoom in a little bit. I'm going to get my Bezier tool, and I'm literally just going to roughly trace these out. I'm not taking much care in this example, and then what we can do is come up, select our selection tool, hold down shift, select the image behind, come up to path, and come down to union, and that will effectively remove those holes from our path. So we end up with this quite effective single path design. So that's brightness cutoff that we've looked at. Let's have a quick look at all the others. So brightness cutoff, we've looked at brightness cutoff already. We're going to press apply just to apply it, and then we can move it over, and we've got an example of brightness cutoff. So let's go down our list and do edge detection. So edge detection looks for contrast in the image, so it knows where edges are. We can adjust our threshold to determine how much of a contrast it needs between the two sides of an edge. And as you can see, we can get quite dramatically different results using this edge detection. So if we bring it down, we'll stick with that, we'll press apply, and it gives us a result using edge detection. Colour quantization. Now this works slightly differently. I'm quickly going to skip over to MultiColor. So using MultiColor, we can create multiple traces to build up our image. At the moment, this is set to 8 scans, so it's broken down our image into 8 different brightness steps. So each one of these brightness steps is a separate path in its own right. When we use color quantization in our single scan, what it does is split it down into the number of steps similar to this, and then alternates which one is included within the path. So one will be included, the next one won't, the next one will, next one won't, and we end up with a striped effect. So let's go back to single scan and give it a go. We go up to color quantization, and you can see how it alternates the different color steps. So we've got 8 colors. We can increase it to get more stripes, or of course reduce it to get less. I think that'll do. So I'm happy with that, so I'm going to press apply, and we get our color quantization. The next one we got down here is auto trace. This is just using a slightly different algorithm to do a similar thing. So if we click on our drop down menu, we get auto trace, and we've got adjustments we can make in here. With auto trace, I think where it uses a different algorithm, it doesn't affect the preview window, so all we're getting is the original image. We can adjust things up here. You can't see it changing the image in any way. It doesn't seem to work on the preview window. I think because it's a different algorithm, it doesn't work. but we can adjust our settings to whatever we want, and then we can click apply and get an auto trace. So we can drag that one down. Seem to have changed our colour at some point. Let's put it back to black. After auto trace, we've got this centre line tracing auto trace. So this uses the auto trace algorithm. If we select on this, we can't actually see what's happening, but if we press apply, we get this rather unique geometric design. I'll just put it there. I'll hold down shift, I'll just change our design to black. I'm just going to stretch it out so we can see it. So I'm going to hold down control so I don't change the proportions. And if we zoom in a bit, we can see that we get this rather unique looking geometric design with lots of diagonal lines. But we can shrink that back down and bring it down the bottom. So they're the different options that we got available to us. Again, this is just for single scan, so we've accomplished all these different effects with just the single scan option. The next one I want to look at is multicolor, which creates multiple scans. So I've just come back to our raccoon logo, and we're going to use this just initially to show you some of the different settings within our multicolor. So if we click on our multicolor tab at the top, in here we've got a few different settings now. So if we just quickly look at detection modes, we've got our brightness steps, which we had before. We've also got colours, greys and auto trace. So we can choose between those. We go for colours for now. We've got scans, which determines the amount of traces that we want to take. So with colours, it will split it into 8 colours and make 8 separate paths to represent those colours. Below that, we've got smooth. So with this now, what it does is it puts a certain amount of blur onto the image and then traces that image. This has the effect of smoothing out any rough edges. So it effectively smooths the edges of our paths. Our next option along is stack. Just to illustrate what stack does, I've created a new page and I've just opened up this image of a ball. So we're going to select the image, and with stack not selected, we're going to click apply to create our image. We'll drag that one over. That's our tiled image. We'll select our original image again, and this time we're going to use stack and press apply. So at first glance, these two images don't look too dissimilar. It's not until we look closer that we start to realise there are quite big differences. The top image that we did without the stack applied creates a set of tiles that sit side by side on our page. The big problem with this is if we zoom in, we can see we've got all these gaps between our different images, and because we're cutting out a tile for each individual colour, it means we've got to have more complex paths to represent those different colours. We can see this if we break the image down into the separate colours. When we create a multicoloured scan, what it does is group all the different scans together. So if we click on ungroup, we can split them up into the different colours. We click off to deselect them all, and then when we just drag these colours apart, we can see that each individual colour is a complex path in its own right. Whereas if we come down to our stacked image, we'll ungroup this one the same, we'll click off, and this time when we drag out the separate colours, we can see that they're more simplistic paths stacked one on top of the other. So they're easier to produce, you don't get the gaps in between, and I think they're just generally a better option. So I'd leave the stacked option always ticked. So let's take a look at how we can produce some multicoloured images from photos. So here I've got an image of a blue tit. If we click on it, at the moment we've got it set on single scan, brightness cut off. So we're going to come over to the multicoloured scan. So in here, from detection mode, I've got colours set. We could have, of course, had the brightness steps, greys or auto trace. Under that, number of scans I've got set at 8. I haven't turned on the smoothing. We've got stack applied, and I'm just going to apply that image to see what it comes out like. So we can drag our image off to one side, and there's our 8 scan image. So under the stack and smooth, we've got this extra option called remove background. What remove background actually does is just take away the bottom layer. So depending on what colour the bottom layer is, it'll remove that colour from our image. So now with the remove background selected, I'll select the image again and we'll press apply and see what happens. So we've created another image with background removed. So at first glance, these two images don't look that much different. It hasn't removed the blue background, but what it's done is removed the bottom layer. So if we drag this over the image of our woman over here, we can see that it's removed the bottom layer, which in this case seems to be the white colour of the feathers. So it's had an attempt at removing the background, but it's just removed the wrong colour. So if you're not getting the results that you're expecting, that's likely to be why. So if we wanted to remove the blue background, what we could do is turn off the remove background, turn off the stack, we click on our image, we press apply. Because this time it's going to create our image with tiles, if we remove the light blue, it should remove the background. So I'll drag our image off to the side. Again, the image quality doesn't look as good because we've done it without the stack, so we're going to have gaps in between our different coloured layers. But regardless, we're going to click on the ungroup, click off, click our light blue, press delete, and we can get rid of our background that way. So that's just another option you've got if you wanted to remove the background. If we want our images to look more detailed, we can add more layers. The problem with adding more layers is the more layers we've got, the more complex it is and the slower your computer's going to run. But I'm going to increase this to 20. We need to select our image. So we've got a preview down the bottom here, and we can press apply. And it will produce our image. We can drag it off to the side. With the Trace Bitmap, it's very good at creating these more complex areas of colour. It's the areas of very similar colours that tend to get turned into blocks of colours and may need a bit of extra work. So that's quite a good representation. We move down and we have a look at the girl's face. We just zoom in slightly. I'm going to select my image. This time I'm going to increase it up to 40 and I'm going to press apply. So with that done, we can drag our image over. And you can see it makes quite a good copy. The hair looks very detailed, which is great, but the smoother gradients tend to look not quite so impressive. And another thing that tends to happen, because we've got a reduced colour palette, the colours quite often look slightly washed out. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to come up to Filters, down to Colour, and then down to Brilliance. We want to click on the Live Preview, and then we can just make some fine adjustments. So what I'm going to do is just zero all these to start with. When you press 0 on brightness, it's actually default is 1, but it'll change it to that anyway. So we just change all these, go down, change them to 0. To set them so our image hasn't been changed in any way, shape or form. We can then add a little bit of colour by increasing the saturation. So whenever you do this, you want to make small adjustments and you can just increase your image till you're happy with it. I think I prefer it like that, so I'm going to keep my image like that. Sometimes when you make these small increments using the plus and minus buttons up here, the adjustments are still too much, so you can actually come in and just make finer adjustments by changing the figures inside and do it that way. Actually, that looks quite good, so I'm going to keep that. So I'm going to press apply. Once it's applied, we can get rid of our dialog box and we've got our image there. So I think for a vector copy of our photo, that's quite good, especially the hair. Like I say, where you've got these more complex colour changes, it's picked up really well by the Trace Bitmap function. It's where we've got smooth gradients like the cheeks and the lips and the whites of the eyes that it's not so effective. So you may need to do extra work to improve these elements. If we zoom in, one thing I notice is a reflection in the eyes doesn't seem to be quite as bright as they could be. So to correct that, I'm just going to come up, get my ellipse tool. We're zooming a bit. And I'm just going to drag an ellipse over the top of the white there. It looks like we've got a stroke applied, so if you hold down Shift, click on the X down the bottom, we can change that. I'm going to come up, grab my selection tool, and I'm just going to adjust that slightly. Move it into place. I'm going to press Ctrl D to duplicate it. We move our image over, I'm going to move my ellipse over. I'm going to shrink it down a bit so it more closely represents the one on this side. And if we zoom out, we can see that we've created quite a realistic copy of our original photo. So, user-assisted trace. What user-assisted trace does, it allows you to try and help Inkscape to work out what part of the image is the foreground. So, for example, we want to just have this bird. We don't want all this background junk. We just want this bird and we want it to try and remove the background. So what I'm going to do is come over and grab my Bezier tool, and I'm just going to draw just a rough object over the top, which includes the section of the image that I want to be the foreground and some of the background. If we reduce the opacity, we can see our image underneath. I think I'll also just change the colour of our guide path. So now we can hold down Shift, select our main image. We're going to come back over, select our Trace Bitmap dialog box, and if we look down now at the preview, we've cut out all of that background. So let's press apply and see what we get. First thing we need to do is delete our guide object off the top. Now if we zoom into this, it's done a fairly good job. We've got some little bits of blue showing around the edges. What it has done though is left this white background on. So I'm going to back step. This time I've added remove background. I'm going to select the mask. I'm going to hold down Shift and select our main image, and I'm going to press apply. So we can click off, we can delete our mask, and we can remove our main image. As we move this across, you'll notice that there's holes within our image that are the same colour as the white background. If you wanted to fill in the holes, one way we can do this is to make a copy. So we can press Ctrl D to duplicate it. We can then ungroup it. We can then come to Path Union. We can then go Path Break Apart. What this does is separate all of the little subpaths that are inside it. We can then come up to Path Union again. So now we've just made a solid shape. Since the holes within our image were white, we can turn this shape to white, and then we can drop it to the bottom so it's behind the rest of our image. Then drag a box over the top. We can group it all together, click on the group button, and now when we drag that over the top of our blue sky, we can see that we've filled in the missing sections with white. So the user-assisted trace does work quite well when you've got a foreground object that's completely a different colour from the background, and the background is a pretty uniform colour. The results do vary from image to image, so you may have to use other means to cut out your foreground image. One last thing I wanted to go over is how you can scan just a small area of your image. I say this image isn't too bad because most of the background is made up with blue, but say I just wanted to scan this balloon and nothing else. What I've done here is I've made a mask that sits over the top. So if I press Ctrl Z to move it back over the top. Now I can clip this image by holding down Shift, selecting the background colour, coming up to Object, down to Clip, over to Set Clip. And that cuts out my image. So now on the canvas, all I've got visible is the singular balloon. But if we look over at our Trace Bitmap dialog box, you can see that we've got all of the original photo. So even if you've got something clipped, it still picks up the whole of the original image. The only way we can change this is to save this image as an image in its own right. So if we come up to File, down to Export. If we come back over, click on Import, import our image back in. We can click OK to all the settings. Now our image only consists of the masked balloon. So this time if we come up to Trace Bitmap, our image is only going to be that balloon. So now if we press apply, we can get a direct copy of that balloon on its own. So I think that'll do us for this video. If you've got any questions, leave them in the comments below and I'll get back to you. If not, thanks for watching and I'll see you in the next video.